The economy is biting hard, and Africa as a whole is up against rising debt levels despite glowing growth projections. Now, the big question is, what is the bet that policies put in place by respective governments are working, and how long before they permeate? Well, these questions and more will be answered in the course of the program. As always, my name is Leah Katung-Babatunde, and it's nice to have you join me on this numbers edition. We rolled it from the development trends table.
Vice President Kashim Shettima has promised attendees of the 30th Nigerian Economic Summit and the business community that the Green Book recommendations will be implemented in accordance with government priorities. He gave the assurances during his closing remarks at the 30th Economic Summit in Abuja this Wednesday. The 30th Summit, he said, was a great success, just like the previous ones, not because so many delegates attended, but rather because the main topics that will direct the nation's economic development and growth were covered in both plenary and concurrent sessions. Governor Yemi Kale of the Central Bank of Nigeria has affirmed that the bank has commenced a revalidation exercise to ascertain complaints of manufacturers and importers over foreign exchange claims worth $2.4 billion. He explained that the policy initiatives by the bank on the foreign exchange market have led to a diaspora remittance of $600 million within the first 9 months of 2024.
I see no substitute for the fundamentals of an economy. No substitute. So before you start talking about the trade-offs you are making, I think we all have to agree that ultimately we have to get the fundamentals of the economy working.
The World Bank says Nigeria is showing positive results at the macroeconomic level from reforms embarked upon a year ago. This was contained in the Nigeria Development Update report titled Staying the Course, Progress Amid Pressing Challenges, which highlighted the need to sustain these policies while addressing structural issues to combat inflation and promote long-term investment, growth, and job creation. The report argues that the new direction of macroeconomic policies should be sustained, including the Central Bank of Nigeria's appropriately tight monetary policy stance. Headline inflation in September 2024 increased to 32.7%, a 0.55% rise from the August 2024 headline inflation rate, which stood at 32.15%. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, headline inflation rate was 5.98 percentage points higher than the rate recorded in September 2023, which was 26.72%. The increase was attributed to the rise in the average price of some items, led by food and non-alcoholic beverages at 16.94%.
Is Africa growing or not? Dr. Yemi Kale, the Group Chief Economist of Afreximbank, joined me for this conversation on the sidelines of the 30th edition of the Nigerian Economic Summit. The Nigerian Economic Summit is 30, and it's been decades of policy conversations with a view to shaping perspectives for government to yield tangible results across sectors. Now, just like Nigeria, African leaders have been asked questions by their citizens if these kinds of conversations have made any meaningful impact at all in their administrations. I have joining me Dr. Yemi Kale. He is Afreximbank's chief economist, and of course, he was the former Statistician-General of Nigeria. It's nice to have you, Doctor, for this conversation.
Very nice to see you again, Leah. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And how is Egypt and everywhere?
Egypt is fine. Egypt is fine. Everywhere is fine. Africa is improving, so it's good to be back home for the Economic Summit.
It's October already, and it will look like most African countries have sort of derailed from the projections for the year. Am I correct?
No, actually, if you look at the key, well, it depends on which indicator you look at. If you look at the key indicators, GDP was estimated to grow by about between 3 to 3.5% in 2024. If you look at the countries that have so far published their first half year GDP numbers, over half of them are on track. They're either doing in line with, they're either performing in line with projections, or they're actually doing better. So the forecast for GDP for the year is probably going to be on target or slightly better. The same thing applies to inflation, even though there are regional and country variations. As a continent as well, the trend for inflation is one of decline. Again, the forecast that we're given at the beginning of the year, it's actually doing as well or better than was anticipated at the beginning of the year. Issues of debt is where they're not doing as well. Even issues of trade, for international trade for African countries, also improving slightly better than it was forecast at the beginning of the year. So most of the indicators, not all of them, most of the indicators are, on an average, are doing well. But that doesn't mean that every individual country in the continent is doing well. There are some countries doing very well. There are some countries, other countries who are not meeting their targets. But if you look at the overall African average for most of the indicators, they're on track in line with the forecast that were given at the beginning of the year.
Can you walk me through the factors at play here? Are they country specific or regional specific when we look at the indicators and the paces that countries grow?
I think they are both. They are global, they are regional, and they are country specific. Country specific easy. It is dependent on countries that are able to exploit the areas where they have competitive advantage. They're able to avoid what I call unforced errors. In other words, just taking wrong decisions and doing the wrong things, and when they even know they find that they're doing the wrong things, they continue doing the wrong things and even make it worse. Countries that are able to like I said, take the right decisions and understand their economies and exploit the advantages that are in the global economy. So that's the country specific. Regional specific because they're able to exploit regional economic agreements among themselves, and of course the global economy. So because the global, for example, Africa trades significantly with non-African countries. That's why intra-African trade is still less than 20%. So the prospects for Africa is largely dependent on what's happening in the global economic environment. So as the US, as Europe, as Asia, China, and co are improving, they are purchasing and growing. They start buying a lot more of Africa's products. Now, depending on which country is doing well and who supplies those countries their exports, they are going to do as well. So depending on the global trajectory, and in particular which country, your dominant trading partner, if it's doing well, you're going to do well. If it's doing badly, you're going to do badly. If commodity prices, again, depending on whether you're a commodity importer or exporter, commodity prices have been very volatile this year, and most of the prices have gone up. So if you're a commodity exporter, gold, for example, has gone up significantly in price. So if you're a country in Africa that exports significant amounts of gold, you're going to do very well because it's huge prices. Or oil, when oil prices go up, like Nigeria also benefits if they're able to sort the production out. So it depends on a whole array of global, regional, as well as country-specific circumstances that will determine the trajectory of your macroeconomic indicators.
Okay, looking at the trade aspect now, Africa is still a net exporter of raw materials. You've just mentioned gold. Nigeria is known for oil and so many other countries. Is the bank, what is the bank's position on value addition before exports?
That's exactly, that's exactly the definition of Afreximbank's mandate. It's to improve intra-African trade and export promotion. It's to ensure that, and one of the ways we know we have to do that is value addition. So in addition to we don't just finance, give countries and businesses the country's money. We always emphasize that we focus more on countries that are looking to export, not necessarily domestic consumption, and also those that want to build factories or expand domestic production that has value addition. So if we look at the continent, we see that Nigeria is importing, I don't know, televisions, for example, and we see that Ghana has capacity or competitive advantage in building televisions, what we'll do is go to Ghana and say, you know what, we're going to support you financially so you can build a TV production system structure in your country, so that Nigeria will come and buy from its partner Africa Court in Ghana rather than having to import it from Europe or US. So that's exactly what Afreximbank does, the entire value addition process, rather than just exporting raw material. We have a whole strategy in that regard.
Okay. I'm asking this question, and I guess you know why I asked this question, because it will seem like countries are still focused on exporting raw. And one begins to answer, is Africa not exporting jobs? West Africa, for instance, we have the French-speaking countries pulling out of the bloc and creating a gap there. So you would expect that these countries will have their gold mined and refined on the continent, but I don't think something like that is happening now.
Well, that's why we're having this conversation. I think the entire global economic structure, not just the financial part, has to change. This economic structure we're working on is one that was designed before African countries even had their independence. It was put in place before we could even make decisions ourselves, and we're now forced to operate in that kind of system. When the colonial rulers left, they designed that structure because African countries were there just for exporting raw material. That's exactly where they wanted to stay and what they wanted us to do, export raw materials for their use in their own countries and regions. That's exactly what we are supposed to do. Now, when you have had such a structure for hundreds of years, it's difficult, to be fair, on most African countries. It's difficult to just automatically uproot that system, especially when you're dealing in a global economic structure, financial system that technically works against you, that tries to perpetuate these kinds of things. So it takes a gradual process to break it. For African countries to do exactly what you are saying, they need huge financial resources, which they don't have. They need to go to international markets, but then you go to international markets and the rules are not very favorable. The hurdles you have to jump are very, very high. There's this perception of risk. African countries are high risk, so they have to pay more and the hurdles have to be high. And I always say it creates a vicious cycle. So you say African countries are high risk, so you give them higher hurdles to jump over, the higher interest rates. But it's because of those higher interest rate hurdles that they eventually default. When they now default, you say they are risk. So you're saying they are high risk, so we're going to increase the interest rates. But then by doing that, you're making it harder for them to repay. So they default, and you say, well, you see, they are high risk, and it continues like that. So when you have that kind of system, it's difficult to break out of it. And that's why I believe the way forward is for a change. Africa needs to speak with one voice. There is another scramble for Africa now. These countries are seeing that Africa is where the resources are. They need to partner with Africa. The geopolitical tensions and realignment, you see, China is trying to get into Africa as quickly as possible. Russia is trying to get into Africa. The US is trying to get, so they're all competing. Now, this is the time when Africa should now say, okay, they have the upper hand, speak together with one voice, which is one thing we have been found difficult to do over the past. With one voice, hold our ground and dictate our terms for the rest of the world, for us to partner with them. I think if we speak with one voice, we act like one global Africa. When I say global Africa, I'm not talking about the geographical location, the map that was designed for us again by colonial times. I'm talking about Africans wherever they live, in the diaspora, in the Caribbean. Whether you jackpot out of the geographical location that is Africa, or you are taken forcefully hundreds of years ago, you're African. You have your roots in Africa. We have similar identities, cultures, and all of us have to now partner and say, look, we want to drive this continent forward. And if we do that, then we see the strength of the continent. But it's because of our weaknesses, they usually pull us apart very easily, and that's usually a problem. So you can have a regional group agree on tariffs or how to approach more advanced countries, and those advanced countries can very easily go and meet maybe the weakest of that group, offer them some, should I call it incentives?
They begin to mess up.
They start to move away from those agreements, and this is exactly what has perpetuated a lot of the challenges we have in the continent.
Okay, so where is Nigeria in the midst of all this?
Well, I agreed with one of the statements, probably one of the few statements I agreed with by the World Bank, where it says that for Africa to rise, Nigeria has to rise. Nigeria is extremely dominant. Nigeria is one of the few countries if in the world that I would say has everything going for it. On paper, there's just no reason why Nigeria should not be top 10 most dominant country in the world. It's as if we are just blessed with everything. All the advantages and none of the disadvantages. Most of the disadvantages Nigeria have are man-made, developed by ourselves, not by God, not by circumstance. So Nigeria has no reason to be anywhere to where it is. It needs to be. It has everything. But to have that leadership role, which it's not playing very effectively, Nigeria should be driving the continent, not just in terms of growth, but in terms of direction. It should be the country that other African countries are looking up to, not just in name only, but in actual. So we're the ones that are leading the battles and discussions with other countries, other regional blocs. We're the ones that are setting the pace. We are the ones where discoveries are happening in every area. We are doing that in some parts of in some sectors, fintech and so on. You find most of them are Nigeria. But I'm talking about Nigerians, but we're not doing that effectively enough. You'll find that in most regional or international organizations, our voices are not really heard. When I was in public sector, there was a common, it wasn't a joke, reality that we go to all these international events where the significant decisions that affect both Nigeria and global economic environments are discussed, and many of our delegates are out shopping. I'm sorry, that's just the reality. And there's nothing wrong in going to shop, that's not what I'm saying. But when you need to be in the room, you need to have a proper idea of what you're trying to do, and you need to push your position. I was also in government when we found that we had so many agreements. We had signed bilateral agreements with so many countries, some of them that were more beneficial to the other country than Nigeria, but we signed it anyway. Others that were mutually beneficial, the other countries are taking advantage of the agreement, but we in Nigeria are not, because we don't even understand the benefits that we could. So these things is what is inhibiting us from taking our position as a leader in practice, the leader as far as the continent is concerned.
So now that you've mentioned the World Bank, there's this report again from the World Bank that is making a lot of us uncomfortable, saying that the poverty reduction campaign could be delayed by as much as a century, because a lot of the fundamentals point to that fact. And knowing that Nigeria is the poverty capital of the world and Africa has the highest number of poor persons, is it a bother to you?
Well, firstly, speaking from a data perspective, which I try not to do these days, I'm very careful about how we use data to frame conclusions. So when you say poverty capital, that's only because you're looking at it in terms of the absolute number of people in poverty based on the statistics, not the per capita. For example, if everybody in Ghana is poor, there will still be fewer than the poor people in Nigeria, because Nigeria's population is just a lot high. You understand what I'm trying to say? So you can have 99.9% poverty in Ghana, or maybe I should pick a smaller country, but that will still be fewer than the number of people in poverty in one or two states in Nigeria, just because we have the population. So I think we have to put that in the context. But the point is, Nigeria has according to data, has the most number of poor people in the world currently. And this is one of the things we have done over the years, and it's not particular to any administration, just has been happening over time. When you have problems and you allow them to fester, they become bigger problems. And they continue to become bigger and bigger problems. So when you wake up and you want to now try and solve them, you could have solved those problems much earlier with a lot less impact. But because you waited for so long, you have made the problem much bigger, and you have reduced the impact, and you have extended the time it's going to take to solve it. One of the biggest challenges for Nigeria currently is as a result of the subsidy removal and its implications on households, incomes. That's one of the things that the World Bank also says is contributing to poverty, because household incomes have been destabilized and inability to purchase goods and services to take care of themselves, which is a part of what is contributing to this poverty capital in the world conversation. There are many times in our past that we could have done this when it was a lot less strenuous, but we didn't. We did it now, and now the impact is so much more significant. That doesn't mean we should not have done it. Sometimes it's not the policy that is wrong. Sometimes the timing of the policy, and sometimes in Nigeria's history is the way we implement the right policy that results in a bad outcome. So you can have the right policy implemented badly. You can have the right policy done at the wrong time, and you can just have the wrong policy. And Nigeria has, over time, done all three. I think if we did some of the things we were supposed to do earlier than this, the impact will not be as bad. But that's where we are, because we waited this long. We have taken things for granted. We have dragged on negative ideas for a very long time and allowed it and even cutted it. This is exactly the consequence. It's going to take longer to fix because it has now become a much bigger problem than it was initially, and it had to be.
So is there a way out? And what sectors do you think it should be prioritized?
There is always a way out of every challenge. I'm not just speaking optimistically. I'm speaking practically. First, you have to first understand your problem, and that goes back to data. Unfortunately, as boring as that subject is, it goes back to data. You have to understand what your problem is. You have to. I always say this statement: if we do the right things for the right reasons at the right time and in the right way, we fix all our problems. But we never get all those four criteria together. We do the right things for the wrong reasons, we'll do the right things at the right time or the wrong time, or we have some agenda where we are doing some things. So if we understand our problems properly, we profile solutions to the problems. We make it very clear the negative consequences of this before they're implemented. We're going to do this, and this is what's going to happen. You are very clear the challenges that are going to come out from a particular policy or program and how long it's going to last. And then you put in palliatives to cushion the effect. And then you keep faith with the policy, which is what I guess one of the few parts that the World Bank said. Once you get the right policy, you communicate it to the public very well. They understand what is going on. You tell them that, look, it's going to be strenuous for X. You can actually calculate this. It's going to take this long, but we have put this in place so that you won't feel it as much. And it is visible. People can see what's been put in place. They can feel that they are cushioning the effect. And you keep faith with those policies, those ideas. Then eventually you're going to get there. If you put the wrong policies, you change your mind halfway, you give one-off palliatives just to shut people down temporarily, and then you go back to it's not going to work.
They get hungry and come back again.
They come back again, and when they come back, it's going to be a lot worse. There was a statement I heard yesterday about, just use an example of the Boko Haram issue, where the chief of defense staff said, and it resonated, that, look, initially when Boko Haram started, these were people that had a combination of both good and bad lives. Things just went badly and they reacted to it. But now they're giving birth to children. They don't even know the good part of anything. All they're born into is death and destruction. To them, that's the normal thing. So when you have that, so they don't even know that it is wrong, because this is what they were born into. They think taking life is like a regular part of life. And so you now have a bigger problem, because you didn't want to solve a smaller one. That's exactly what I'm talking about. When you allow things to fester. I remember giving a presentation once when I was Statistician-General long before Boko Haram started, to the governors, the Economic Council, National Economic Council, where we showed indicators in Northeast were worsening. Social indicators were getting worse. And the consequence, look, if this continues, we're going to have a problem. It was ignored. And of course, a year or two later, so these are the kind of things I'm talking about. If you allow things to continue, you don't fix it, they will get bigger, and then the solution becomes a lot more difficult. And I think that's where we are now. We have two choices: bite the bullet and according to the World Bank, stay for 10 to 15 years if we can, or don't do that and allow things to get even worse. So what we are crying about today, there are some people that I was speaking to some people yesterday, and they said 10 years ago, they were crying about things that they felt that was the worst part of Nigeria has ever been. But now they can't wait to go back to where they were before. And that, again, that's the point. You thought it was a bad situation, you didn't want to deal with it. You waited, and it's even a bigger problem. You're now looking. I talked to businesses, I don't want to mention names, where when the exchange rate was they're getting it at 700 naira in the parallel market. They thought that was the worst thing ever. They will happily pay 700 naira per dollar right now. But then it was like, this is ridiculous. This is a crazy thing. This is not sustainable. Now they're looking for 700 naira. Now it's 1,006. You leave it, it's going to get worse. So by the way, that assumes that you're doing the right policy, the right things in the first place. When I say keep faith with policy and bite the bullet and just allow things to run and take the hit, it is on the assumption that the right thing in the first place is what you are. Because if you have the wrong policy and you're just keeping faith, it's not going to change anything. You have to get the right policy first to keep faith with it. Whether we are doing the right things or not is a totally different conversation. But first of all, get the right things done, understand the challenges in your economy, understand how to fix it, and support your people that are going to go through a lot of challenges while you do so, for as long as you need to do so, and just keep faith with it. But the first is getting it right, getting the policy right. If you don't get it right, then continuing it for 10 to 15 years is just going to make things even worse in 15 years.
Yeah, so the numbers do really matter.
They do.
I must thank you, Dr. Yemi, for giving
Thank you,
time
Leah.
for this conversation.
Always nice having this conversation with you. Thank you.
My name is Aldumi Kori.
Keep watching The Policy with Leah.
It aims to provide policymakers an opportunity to explain their policies in a way that members of the public affected by those policies can understand and engage with those policies.
Keep watching The Policy with Leah.
We move now to our education segment, Simplified, and from there we head to the markets. We birth here on this edition, and don't forget that you can log on to our sister website www.marketnigeriatv.com. We have all the Niger market stories for you there. Until we come your way again, same time next week, don't forget to send in your questions, comments, and observations, and follow us on YouTube at Saban Media Services. Have a beautiful weekend, and God bless Nigeria.